Hey everyone, tonight we're uncovering the most successful mass murder in human history. Not of people, but of gods. A systematic extermination so complete that most of you don't even realize you're living in the aftermath of a spiritual genocide that wiped out thousands of divine beings who once walked among humanity as friends, lovers, and protectors. Before we begin, hit like if you're ready to discover how Christianity didn't just defeat paganism, but committed deicide on an industrial scale. And let me know in the comments if you've ever felt like something sacred was missing from the modern world. Now dim those lights and settle in. We're about to explore how the God of Love orchestrated the most thorough campaign of divine assassination in history, transforming a world alive with gods into a spiritual wasteland where only one voice is allowed to speak from heaven. Now, without further ado, let's begin. The oak tree speaks in the pre-dawn darkness. Its ancient voice creaks through bark and branch, whispering secrets that human ears have forgotten how to hear. But once, in a world that breathes with divine presence, every rustle held a message. Every shadow harbored a spirit. Every stream carried the laughter of nymphs to the sea. Walk backward through time before the cross cast its shadow across Europe. Before the bells replaced the drums. Before the one God demanded silence from all others. Here, in this world thick with divinity, the sacred bleeds through every crack in reality. In the mist-shrouded hills of Gaul, a Celtic warrior kneels before a carved stone face. The god Cernunnos gazes back with antlered crown and knowing eyes, his lap heavy with coins and grain. The warrior's calloused hands shake as he places his offering, not from fear, but from the electric presence that fills his bones. This god knows him. This god chose his father's father's father to serve. The blood bond runs deeper than memory. The stone is warm to the touch. In a Germanic longhouse, firelight dances across wooden idols while winter winds howl outside. Odin hangs from his tree of sacrifice, one eye missing, wisdom drunk and terrible. Thor's hammer gleams with protective runes. Freya's amber eyes promise fertility and death in equal measure. The family that gathers here carries these gods in their names, their laws, their very breath. When spring returns, they will plant Thor's hammer in their fields. When warriors die, ravens will carry their souls to Valhalla's golden halls. The fire crackles with divine hunger. Along the Mediterranean shore, Roman soldiers pour wine into the earth before battle. They whisper to Mars, god of war, god of springtime, god of their very civilization. In their homes, the lairers dance in flickering lamplight. Household spirits who remember when their great-grandfathers first lit fires on these hearths. These gods are not distant. They are family. They are blood. They are Rome itself made manifest in divine flesh. The wine seeps into hungry soil. But this world sprawls far beyond Europe's forests and Rome's marble columns. In the cedar groves of Lebanon, Astarte receives offerings of honey and precious oils. Her priestesses know the secret names that make women fertile and fields flourish. In Babylon's ziggurats, Marduk rules the New Year's festival, his triumph over chaos renewed each spring in ritual and rejoicing. Ishtar descends to the underworld and returns, bringing life from death in an endless sacred cycle. Each god wears the face of the land that birthed them. Watch how the divine saturates every breath of daily life. The Roman paterfamilias rises each morning to honor his family's gods, offering bread and salt to spirits older than the city itself. The Germanic housewife bakes ritual breads shaped like Freya's sacred animals, each bite a prayer for protection. Celtic children learn to leave offerings at crossroads where three paths meet: milk for the spirits, songs for the wind, silver for the shadowy folk who dance between worlds. Even the gods dance with each other, boundaries bleeding like watercolors in rain. When Roman legions march into Gaul, Jupiter meets Tyrannus in a crash of thunder and lightning. They recognize each other, Skyfather to Skyfather, Stormlord to Stormlord. The names change, but the divine essence flows like wine poured from one cup to another. Mercury finds his reflection in Celtic Lugh, master of all arts. Minerva and Brigid clasp hands across cultural divides, wisdom goddesses who tend the sacred flames of inspiration. The Romans call it interpretatio romana, the art of seeing familiar gods wearing foreign faces. But it runs deeper than mere translation. It speaks to something profound about the nature of the divine itself, fluid, vast, refusing the sharp boundaries that human minds try to impose. In oracle caves and sacred springs, the gods speak directly to their people. At Delphi, Apollo's priestess breathes sacred vapors, and prophecy spills from her lips like honey mixed with wine. At Dodona, Zeus whispers through rustling oak leaves, his voice older than civilization. The Germanic tribes read runes carved on sacred lots, each symbol a doorway to divine knowledge. Celtic druids disappear into grove darkness and return with laws handed down from otherworldly courts. The gods are not silent, they are not distant, they are intimate as breath, present as blood, real as the earth beneath mortal feet. Sacred kingship flows through royal veins like liquid fire. Celtic kings undergo ritual marriage to the land herself, embodying gods like Lu in their very flesh. When they rule justly, the crops flourish. When they fail, famine walks the earth. Roman emperors ascend to divine status while still breathing, their images carved alongside ancient gods in temple niches. Julius Caesar claims descent from Venus herself, goddess blood flowing in mortal veins. Power and divinity intertwine like lovers in the dark. Mystery religions offer direct communion with dying and rising gods. In underground chambers, initiates reenact Mithras slaying the cosmic bull, tasting divine blood, emerging reborn. Dionysus tears through cities in wine-drunk ecstasy, his followers knowing ecstasy that shatters the boundaries between human and divine. These are not mere stories. They are lived experiences, transformations that leave participants forever changed. The gods touch their followers with fire. Every landscape pulses with sacred presence. Mountains thrust skyward as Earth's cathedrals, their peaks crowned with temples where gods and mortals meet. Sacred groves grow thick with divinity, each tree a pillar in nature's temple. Springs bubble with healing powers, their waters blessed by nymphs who remember the world's first dawn. Caves yawn open like doorways to underworld realms, where chthonic gods rule in crystal darkness. No place exists outside the sacred. No moment passes untouched by divine hands. Even the wheel of seasons turns to divine rhythm. Spring explosions of green life celebrate resurrection goddesses emerging from winter tombs. Summer's blazing heat honors sun gods at their peak of power. Autumn harvests thank grain goddesses for their annual sacrifice. Winter's darkness welcomes death gods who promise rest before rebirth. Time itself beats with divine pulse. This is the world Christianity encounters as it spreads beyond its Judean birthplace. A cosmos saturated with divinity, thick with sacred presence, alive with gods who know their people's names. A world where divine and mortal realms bleed together like wine poured into water. A world where the sacred cannot be contained within temple walls, because it flows through every heartbeat, every breath, every grain of soil. But watch the horizon, new winds are rising. A different kind of sacred fire burns in the east, carried by missionaries who preach a singular truth. There is only one God, and all others are lies. The old gods do not yet know they are about to die. In the distance, church bells begin their slow, relentless toll. The sound carries on wind that once brought only the whisper of leaves, the cry of hawks, the laughter of spirits dancing in sacred groves. Something vast and beautiful is about to be torn apart, its pieces scattered and remade into shapes that would be unrecognizable to the hands that first carved divine faces in stone. The last free god draws breath in the growing shadows, unaware that dawn brings not just light, but conquest. The first blow falls in darkness, when most of the gods are sleeping. Constantine dreams of victory beneath a burning cross in 312 AD, and when he wakes, the world tilts on its axis. The emperor, who once poured wine to Mars, now kneels before a different altar, and the shift sends tremors through every temple from Britain to Babylon. Something vast and hungry has awakened in the corridors of power, a singular god who tolerates no rivals, demands no sharing of sacred space. The old gods feel the chill wind of change, but they do not yet understand what approaches. In the Forum Romanum, where Jupiter's eagles have soared for centuries, workmen chip away at divine faces with methodical precision. Each strike of chisel on marble echoes like a death knell. The gods' stone eyes, once bright with paint and gold leaf, stare blindly as their noses crumble, their mouths crack, their divine features blur into unrecognizable ruin. The priests who once tended these images flee into shadows, carrying what sacred objects they can salvage. The hammers ring out their relentless rhythm, fall, fall, fall. Constantine's successors sharpen the blade. Constantius closes temples like a man snuffing candles, one by one, methodically, until darkness spreads across the sacred landscape. The great temple of Serapis in Alexandria, marvel of the ancient world, stands empty. Its priests scatter like birds before storm winds. The god's golden statue, tall as 3 men and radiating divine presence, waits in sudden silence for worshippers who will never come. The temple doors swing shut with the sound of tomb seals breaking. But the true executioner wears purple and speaks with the authority of law itself. Theodosius the Great signs his name to documents that bleed divine blood across parchment. In 391 AD, his edicts slice through the ancient world like a sword of fire. Let no mortal have the audacity to burn incense to the Lares. Let him not worship his penates with wine. Let him not burn lights to them, offer incense, or suspend wreaths. Each forbidden word is a small death. Watch how systematic the slaughter becomes. Imperial agents march through countryside and city alike, armed with legal documents that transform sacred into profane with bureaucratic efficiency. The oak groves where druids once whispered divine secrets ring with the bite of iron axes. Ancient trees, thick with centuries of prayer and sacrifice, topple with crashes that shake the earth. Their sacred sap bleeds gold in the morning light, pooling in soil that will never again taste divine offerings. The forests echo with the screams of murdered gods. In Syria, soldiers storm the magnificent temple of Jupiter Dolichinos, the god's bronze image, warrior and stormbringer, protector of armies, crashes to marble floors with a sound like thunder. Precious metals are stripped away for imperial coffers. Sacred books burn in courtyard fires, their smoke carrying the last prayers of dying priests into empty sky. The temple's eternal flame, tended for 6 centuries, gutters out in sudden darkness. Divine light dies in mortal hands. The economic machinery of the old religions grinds to a halt like a great wheel with broken spokes. Temple complexes that employed hundreds, priests, scribes, musicians, dancers, craftsmen, empty overnight. Sacred prostitutes who served love goddesses with their bodies find themselves branded as whores. Oracular priestesses who spoke divine prophecy are silenced or condemned as demon-possessed. The vast networks of pilgrimage and festival that once pumped gold through the empire's veins dry up like rivers in drought. The gods starve as their followers flee. But resistance flickers in the shadows like banked coals waiting for wind. Julian the Apostate seizes the purple in 361 AD, and for one brief blazing moment, The old gods taste resurrection. Temples reopen with the sound of rusted hinges groaning back to life. Altars that have sat cold and empty suddenly bloom with fresh offerings. The emperor himself sacrifices bulls to Jupiter, their blood splashing across marble that has been dry for decades. Hope burns like wildfire through pagan hearts. Julian's own words ring with desperate faith. I worship the gods openly, and the whole mass of the troops that accompany me worship the gods. He rebuilds temples with the fury of a man racing against time. In Antioch, he restores Apollo's oracle and waits breathlessly for divine voice to break centuries of silence. When the god finally speaks through his priestess, the prophecy cuts like a blade. The old world is dying, and even divine power cannot stop the tide. The emperor's hands shake as he reads the oracle's words, written in letters that seem to bleed on parchment. Julian dies in Persia in 363 AD, pierced by a spear that might have been wielded by mortal enemies or divine justice. With his last breath, legend claims he cries out, "You have conquered, O Galilean." Whether the words are true or false, they echo through history like a funeral bell. The pagan restoration dies with its champion, and the Christian tide rolls back across the empire with renewed force. The gods taste mortality for the first time. Now the persecution deepens like winter cold seeping into bone. Christians who once huddled in catacombs emerge into sunlight, armed with imperial authority and generations of remembered persecution. They have learned the machinery of martyrdom, and they turn it against their former oppressors with surgical precision. Pagan priests who once served wine to gods now serve as entertainment in amphitheaters, fed to beasts or burned as living torches. The wheel of suffering completes its revolution. In the countryside, where pagan roots grow deepest, the conflict takes on guerrilla character. Christian missionaries venture into forest clearings where ancient altars still smoke with sacrifice. Local gods bound to specific hills and streams for millennia make their last stands in familiar territory. Rural priests lead villagers in desperate rites, trying to wake sleeping earth spirits who might drive out the foreign deity with cross and book. The land itself seems to resist, but even mountains can be worn down by persistent rain. The word paganus begins to carry the weight of contempt. It means country dweller, but on Christian tongues, it tastes like curse. The cities have fallen to the new faith, but the countryside clings to old ways, like a dying man gripping life. Village shrines to household gods hide in barn corners and root cellars. Farmers still whisper prayers to grain goddesses while making the sign of the cross for Christian neighbors. Fear and faith war in every human heart. Augustine of Hippo takes up his pen like a weapon, dipping its tip in ink that might as well be divine blood. His words flow across parchment with deadly precision. All the gods of the nations are demons. With a single sentence, he transforms divine beings worshipped for millennia into creatures of ultimate evil. Jupiter, who hurled lightning to protect Rome, becomes a lying spirit whispering corruption. Venus, who blessed lovers with her sacred passion, transforms into succubus, feeding on mortal souls. The pen proves mightier than both sword and sacred flame. Christian scholars craft new taxonomies of the divine, sorting ancient gods into categories of deception. They are not merely false, they are actively malevolent, servants of Satan masquerading as sources of blessing. Every prayer offered to them feeds demonic power. Every sacrifice strengthens hell's armies. To worship them is not just error, it is treason against the kingdom of heaven. Divine genealogies become demon hierarchies with the scratch of scholarly quills. The transformation spreads like plague through imperial veins. In Britain, Roman legions who once carried standards blessed by Jupiter now march beneath crosses blessed by Christ. Celtic druids who memorized divine lore in sacred groves face Christian bishops armed with written scriptures. Norse traders who tattooed Thor's hammer on their arms learn to hide runic scars beneath Christian robes. Even the barbarians cannot escape the spreading shadow. Sacred architecture becomes battleground for divine souls. The Pantheon in Rome, temple to all gods, receives Christian consecration as Santa Maria ad Martires. The circular building that once celebrated divine diversity now houses singular devotion. Pagan columns support Christian altars. Ancient marble, carved with images of forgotten gods, bears witness to prayers in Aramaic rather than Latin. Stone memory holds contradictions that human minds cannot resolve, but the countryside resists like immune system fighting infection. Rural festivals hide pagan celebrations beneath Christian names. Wells sacred to Celtic goddesses become shrines to Virgin Mary, their waters no less miraculous for the change in divine sponsorship. Farmers plant their crops by moon phases older than Christianity, while muttering prayers to Christ for good harvest. The old gods learn to wear new masks. In the growing darkness between temple and church, between ancient and modern, strange hybrid creatures begin to emerge. Gods who once ruled from golden thrones now lurk in shadows, their divine nature twisted by centuries of demonization. They hunger for worship denied, for sacrifice forbidden, for the touch of mortal hands that once brought them such joy. Something vast and beautiful is becoming something else entirely. The stage is set for the most profound transformation in human spiritual history. Not mere conquest, but metamorphosis. Not simple destruction, but deadly alchemy that will transmute gods into demons, divine into diabolic, sacred into profane. The old gods do not simply die, they are murdered, and then resurrected in forms their original worshippers would not recognize. In the distance, Pan's pipes play a melody that sounds increasingly like screaming. In the shadowed groves of Arcadia, where wild thyme grows thick and goat paths wind through ancient olive trees, Pan stirs in the noon heat. His horns catch dappled sunlight filtering through leaves. His cloven hooves press prints into earth that has known his dancing for millennia. Pipes fashioned from river reeds rest against his lips, ready to call forth music that makes mortal hearts race with unnamed longing. He is desire incarnate. He is wildness given form. He is everything Christianity fears most about flesh and forest, body and belonging. The God of the untamed raises his pipes, and the melody that flows forth carries the scent of crushed herbs, the taste of spring water, the electric touch of skin against skin in moonlit clearings. Shepherds hear his music and abandon their flocks to dance until dawn. Maidens feel his call and slip from their fathers' houses to run barefoot through meadows thick with divine presence. Young men taste wine-dark ecstasy and understand for the first time that their bodies are temples to forces older than civilization. Pan plays, and the wilderness comes alive with sacred hunger. But listen, beneath the reed song, something else stirs. In monastery cells and cathedral scriptoriums, scribes dip their quills in ink black as midnight and begin rewriting the very nature of divinity. Each stroke of pen on parchment draws new boundaries between sacred and profane, divine and demonic, salvation and damnation. The God who once blessed fertility and freedom becomes something else entirely, a creature of shadow and sulfur, master of temptation and spiritual destruction. The transformation begins with appearance. Christian artists study pagan mosaics and statues with the intensity of military strategists surveying enemy territory. They catalogue Pan's features like evidence in a trial, the horns that crown his head like twisted halos, the goat legs that speak to beast rather than angel, the fur that marks him as creature of earth rather than heaven. Most damning of all, the massive phallus that proclaims his dominion over flesh, fertility, and the forbidden pleasures that monastic minds spend sleepless nights trying to forget. Every divine attribute becomes diabolic evidence. Watch how medieval imagination reshapes the god of wild places into the prince of darkness. Pan's horns grow longer, sharper, more menacing. His goat legs spread wider, more bestial, more threatening. His musical pipes transform into instruments of temptation, their melodies no longer calling to joy but to sin. His woodland realm becomes the sulphurous pit of hell. His dancing nymphs become succubi, feeding on mortal souls. Divine flesh becomes demonic horror through the alchemy of fear. The transformation ripples through every expression of Christian art and literature. In illuminated manuscripts, devils wear Pan's face while tempting saints in desert wildernesses. Cathedral gargoyles snarl with his horned visage, warning parishioners of spiritual dangers lurking beyond holy walls. Morality plays cast him as the antagonist in cosmic dramas where salvation and damnation battle for human souls. Art becomes theology, becomes lived reality, but Pan does not suffer this metamorphosis alone. Across the pagan world, horned gods feel the weight of Christian condemnation, settling on their divine shoulders like chains forged in monastery workshops. Cernunnos, the antlered god of Celtic forests, watches his image carved into demon masks that frightening children into church pews. The Germanic Freya, whose horn of plenty once blessed harvest festivals, finds his generosity recast as demonic bounty offered in exchange for mortal souls. All wildness becomes suspect. All horns become hellish. Dionysus writhes under the same theological torture. The god who brought wine and ecstasy to mortal lips, who taught humanity the sacred madness of divine possession, discovers his gifts reframed as diabolical intoxication. His vine-crowned festivals become witches' sabbaths. His dancing maenads transform into possessed women requiring exorcism. The wine that once carried divine communion becomes the blood of demonic pacts. Even divine joy curdles into infernal corruption. The Church Fathers sharpen their theological knives with surgical precision. Jerome writes of demons who have the faces of men and the bodies of beasts, his words painting Pan's hybrid nature as proof of spiritual monstrosity. Augustine declares that the demons often appear in forms they like, suggesting that Pan's appealing aspect merely disguises his true malevolence. John Chrysostom thunders that pagan gods are not gods but demons, his golden tongue turning divine beauty into diabolic deception. Sacred texts become grimoires of condemnation. But the most profound transformation occurs not in theological treatises, but in the lived experience of rural communities where Pan's presence still lingers like morning mist in forest clearings. Christian missionaries venture into villages where goat herds still leave offerings at woodland shrines, where women still dance naked under full moons to ensure fertility, where men still feel the wild god's presence stirring in their blood during spring festivals. The missionaries come armed with crosses and holy water, but their most potent weapon is fear. They speak of the horned one who appears to witches in midnight clearings, who demands obscene worship in exchange for worldly power. They describe Sabbaths where devil worshippers dance naked around fires, kissing the posterior of their horned master, coupling with demons in parodies of sacred marriage. The same activities that once brought communities together in celebration of divine wildness become evidence of diabolical corruption. Sacred becomes sacrilege with the wave of a consecrated hand. The transformation accelerates during the witch trials of the late medieval period. Accused women confess under torture to meetings with the devil himself, and their descriptions match Pan's appearance with horrifying accuracy. Horns, yes. Goat legs, certainly. A massive phallus that demands sexual homage. The ability to transform into animal shape. Mastery over wild beasts and growing things. Everything that once marked Pan as god of nature now marks him as lord of hell. Trial records from across Europe echo with testimony that would have sounded familiar to ancient Greeks worshipping in Arcadian groves. He appeared as a great black goat with horns upon his head. He bade us dance, and we danced until the cock crew. He lay with each of us in turn, and his member was cold as ice and large as a horse's. The sacred marriage between deity and devotee becomes rape by diabolic force. Even the locations change, meaning like poison spreading through healthy tissue. Sacred groves where Pan once piped become evil places where witches gather. Crossroads where the god once blessed travelers become demonic meeting places where devils make pacts with desperate souls. Wells and springs that once bubbled with his blessing now harbor evil spirits that must be exorcised by Christian priests. The very landscape writhes under theological torture. The Green Man suffers similar fate. This ancient deity, face wreathed in leaves and vines, once peered from forest depths as guardian of growing things. Medieval stonemasons carve him into church architecture, but his meaning shifts like shadows at sunset. No longer benevolent nature spirit, he becomes memento mori, reminder that flesh rots back to earth, that all earthly pleasure leads to spiritual death. His leafy face leers from cathedral columns as warning rather than welcome. Even stone memories learn to lie. Notice how fertility itself becomes suspect under Christian eyes. The very forces that create life, sexual desire, seasonal renewal, the wild growth of forest and field, transform into evidence of fallen nature, requiring divine redemption. Pan's domain, once blessed as source of abundance and joy, becomes cursed as realm of temptation and sin. The garden of earthly delights becomes the devil's playground. Lupercalia dies screaming in Rome's streets. The February festival once honored Faunus, Pan's Roman cousin, with races of naked young men through city streets, their leather thongs blessing women with fertility touches. Pope Gelasius II bans the celebration in 494 AD, declaring it diabolic practice incompatible with Christian morality. The runners who once carried divine blessing now carry only shame and condemnation. Sacred flesh becomes pornographic spectacle in Christian eyes. But Pan's music refuses complete silencing. In folktales whispered around winter fires, the devil often appears as trickster rather than tyrant, a figure who outsmarts pompous authority, who helps lovers escape arranged marriages, who teaches forbidden knowledge to those brave enough to seek him out. These stories carry echoes of the god who once championed freedom against civilization's constraints. Divine memory survives in diabolic disguise. The horned god's image spreads through Christian Europe like wildfire through dry grass. Every devil in every morality play wears his face. Every demon in every cathedral fresco bears his horns. Every gargoyle perched on church roofs snarls with his features. The god who once blessed abundance becomes the visual vocabulary for ultimate evil. Christian imagination cannot escape what it has tried to destroy. Medieval grimoires catalogue demons with names that echo ancient divinity. Baphomet, whose goat head bears suspicious resemblance to Pan's own features. Azazel, whose horn-crowned visage recalls the wilderness gods of pre-Christian Arabia. Even Satan himself, Prince of Darkness, borrows Pan's appearance when artists need to give evil a face that mortals can recognize and fear. Hell's aristocracy wears stolen divine flesh. The irony cuts deep as any blade. In trying to erase Pan, Christianity preserves him. Every devil mask carved in church stone keeps his memory alive. Every sermon warning against his temptations spreads his legend to new ears. Every witch trial that describes his Sabbaths ensures his mythology survives, even in twisted form. What the church destroys in one breath, it resurrects in the next. And in forest clearings where moonlight still falls on ancient stones, where wind still carries music through rustling leaves, something stirs in the shadows between tree trunks. Not quite God, not quite demon, but something older than both labels. The wild force that no theology can fully contain, no dogma completely erase. Pan is dead, the philosophers once declared. But devils, apparently, are immortal. The horned one's laughter echoes through medieval nightmares, promising that wildness will always find a way to survive, even if it must wear the mask of evil to do so. The god of ecstasy has become the devil of temptation, but the music plays on, darker now, more dangerous, but undeniably, eternally alive. In the distance, pipes call from shadow-haunted groves, and something with hooves answers their forbidden song. In the crossroads where three paths meet under starless sky, Hecate waits with keys of bone and silver. Her three faces watch past, present, and future simultaneously, while her hounds pace restless circles in the dust. Torches flicker in her hands, not with earthly fire, but with the cold flame that burns in liminal spaces between life and death. Known and unknown, mortal and divine. She is wisdom incarnate. She is magic given form. She is everything that terrifies men who build walls and write laws and claim dominion over mystery itself. The goddess of boundaries knows all crossings, all thresholds, all passages between worlds. Midwives call her name when labor grows dangerous and death hovers near the birthing bed. Healers invoke her blessing over herbs gathered by moonlight. Women seeking justice against brutal husbands whisper prayers at her roadside shrines, leaving offerings of honey and black lambs. Hecate answers. She has always answered. But listen, in monastery cells where monks transcribe scripture by candlelight, a different story takes shape. Quills scratch across parchment like claws against stone, rewriting the nature of female divinity with each stroke. The goddess who once guided souls between worlds becomes something else entirely. A creature of shadow and malice, mistress of forbidden knowledge, seductress leading pure souls into damnation. The transformation begins with fear of women who know too much. Watch how the church dismantles female spiritual authority piece by bloody piece. In pre-Christian Europe, women served as priestesses, oracles, healers, and wise women who carried divine wisdom in their very bones. Celtic druids included women who memorized law and prophecy. Germanic vulvas wandered between settlements, reading fate in runestones and entrails. Roman sibyls spoke Apollo's will to emperors and commoners alike. All this feminine wisdom must be broken on the altar of masculine theology. Christian doctrine declares that women cannot serve at God's altar, cannot speak divine truth, cannot touch the sacred vessels that transform bread and wine into holy flesh. Their bodies, tainted by Eve's original sin, contaminate everything sacred they approach. Their voices, carriers of temptation since Eden's fall, cannot be trusted with divine revelation. The temples that once echoed with priestesses' chants fall silent except for masculine prayers. Diana feels the weight of transformation settling on her divine shoulders, like chains forged in theological workshops. The virgin huntress, who once raced through moonlit forests with silver bow and pack of hounds, discovers her nocturnal wanderings recast as something sinister and unholy. Her midnight hunts become the wild hunt, a procession of demonic spirits leading the damned across storm-torn skies. Divine freedom becomes diabolic license in Christian eyes. The goddess who protected women in childbirth, who blessed the hunt and harvest, who embodied fierce independence from masculine control, finds herself reimagined as leader of witch covens. Medieval texts describe her appearing to gatherings of heretical women who worship her with obscene rites and Sabbath celebrations. Her sacred deer become demons. Her hunting dogs transform into hellhounds. Her silver arrows carry curses rather than divine protection. Everything that once made her goddess now marks her as demon. But some goddesses prove too powerful for complete demonization. Christianity attempts absorption instead, a theological digestion that swallows divine essence while excreting safely sanitized saints. Bridget of Kildare burns brightest among these transformations. The Celtic goddess of smithcraft, poetry, and healing bends, but but does not break under Christian pressure. Her sacred fire continues burning, tended now by Christian nuns rather than pagan priestesses. Watch how carefully the Church preserves what it cannot destroy. St. Bridget inherits her predecessor's feast day, her sacred wells, her association with craftsmanship and inspiration. Pilgrims still journey to her shrines, seeking healing waters and prophetic dreams. But the goddess who once embodied the land's fertility becomes a virgin saint, whose power flows through celibacy rather than sexuality. Divine femininity survives only when properly neutered. The Virgin Mary serves as Christianity's greatest theft of goddess worship. Into her blue robes, the Church pours millennia of human need for divine mother love. She absorbs the prayers once offered to Isis, the devotion once given to Cybele, the tears once shed before Demeter's altar. But unlike the ancient mothers who celebrated sexuality as sacred creative force, Mary's power flows through perpetual virginity. Motherhood without the messy realities of desire, conception, or physical birth. She becomes the impossible woman, mother without sex, goddess without power, feminine without fertility. In the Germanic forests where Holder once ruled winter's domain, her transformation cuts deeper than any blade. The goddess who led the wild hunt across December skies, who spun fate itself on her silver wheel, who blessed households with abundance and protection, finds her divine nature twisted into something monstrous and threatening. Holder becomes the hag, the witch, the crone who steals children in the night. Christian storytellers preserve her name but poison her nature. Where once she flew through winter storms, bringing gifts to faithful households, now she leads processions of the damned. Where once she spun golden thread from flax, now she weaves curses that entangle innocent souls. Where once children left offerings for her blessing, now parents warn them to hide when her howling hunt passes overhead. Divine protection becomes demonic threat through the alchemy of fear. Frau Perchta suffers similar mutilation of memory. The Alpine goddess who ensured justice and proper behavior, who rewarded the industrious and punished the lazy, becomes a cannibalistic witch who slits open bellies and stuffs them with straw. Her role as divine judge remains, but judgment itself transforms from sacred justice into arbitrary cruelty. The goddess of right order becomes the witch of chaotic violence. Notice how Christian imagination particularly targets goddesses associated with liminality, those who ruled boundaries between life and death, civilized and wild, known and mysterious. These divine women embodied knowledge that patriarchal religion found most threatening, the wisdom of birth and death, the power of transformation, the authority to speak for forces beyond human control. They must be silenced or transformed into cautionary tales. Medieval grimoires catalogue female demons with names that echo ancient goddesses. Astaroth, whose identity masks the great Ishtar of Babylon and Assyria. Lilith, whose nocturnal flights recall the night-wandering aspects of mother goddesses. Lamia, whose child-stealing nature perverts the protective maternal instincts of ancient divine mothers. Hell's hierarchy preserves goddess names while murdering goddess nature. The witch trials of the late medieval period complete the theological genocide. Across Europe, thousands of women burn for practicing what their grandmothers called devotion to the old gods. Their confessions, extracted under torture, describe gatherings that sound suspiciously like ancient goddess worship, dancing naked under full moons, anointing bodies with sacred oils, celebrating the cycles of death and rebirth that govern all natural life. Everything that once connected women to divine feminine becomes evidence of diabolic alliance. In Scottish courtrooms, accused witches confess to meeting Diana in woodland clearings, where they dance until dawn breaks. In German torture chambers, women describe flying through night skies with Holder and her retinue of spirits. In Italian trials, the accused speak of nocturnal journeys with Madonna Oriente, whose name preserves ancient sovereignty over eastern winds and dawn's renewal. Divine communion becomes demonic conspiracy under Christian interpretation. The transformation proves so complete that even women begin to fear their own spiritual heritage. Midwives who once called upon Artemis for safe delivery learn to invoke only Virgin Mary and male saints. Herbalists who gathered healing plants by lunar calendar begin to hide their knowledge lest neighbours whisper of witchcraft. Wise women who read omens in bird flight and weather patterns practice their arts in secret, knowing that ancient wisdom now carries the stench of sulphur. Female spiritual authority goes underground, literally demonized. But notice what the church cannot quite erase: the persistence of goddess worship disguised as folk practice. Women still gather sacred herbs at crossroads where Hecate once received offerings. They still leave bread and milk at wells where water spirits dwell. They still light candles for protection during childbirth, invoking saints whose names barely disguise older, more powerful divine mothers. The goddesses survive in shadow, their worship transformed but not destroyed. Even in Christian ritual, goddess elements bleed through like water through cracked stone. The Virgin Mary's blue robes echo Isis's star-spangled garments. Her titles, Queen of Heaven, Star of the Sea, Mother of God, preserve ancient epithets once sung to divine feminine powers. Her feast days align with old goddess celebrations. Her shrines rise on sites once sacred to pre-Christian divine mothers. Christianity swallows the goddesses, but cannot digest their essential nature. The irony tastes bitter as wormwood. In trying to erase female divinity, the church preserves its memory. Every witch burned keeps goddess worship alive in collective memory. Every demon described in theological treatises maintains ancient divine names. Every warning against female spiritual authority acknowledges its persistent power. What cannot be destroyed must be transformed, and transformation is merely another form of survival. In forest clearings where moonlight still falls on ancient stones, where women still gather to share secrets too dangerous for masculine ears, something stirs in the shadows between dogma and devotion. Not quite goddess, not quite witch, but something older than both labels. The feminine divine that no theology can fully contain, no patriarchy completely control. The goddesses may wear new masks now. Saints' faces, demons' names, witches' reputation, but their essence endures like underground rivers that surface wherever the earth grows thin. They wait in crossroads and sacred wells, in birthing chambers and herb gardens, in every place where women gather to claim power that men insist belongs only to their singular masculine god. Hecate's torches still burn in the darkness between worlds, though now they illuminate different truths. Diana's hounds still run through midnight forests, though now they hunt different prey. The divine feminine persists, transformed but unconquered, demonized but not destroyed. In the distance, women's voices rise in songs that sound like prayer, but carry older melodies, older truths, older powers that no amount of theological alchemy can fully transmute into safe, sanitized submission. The witches dance, and the goddesses remember their true names. In the scriptorium of a medieval monastery, Brother Johannes dips his quill in ink black as eternity and begins writing names that should not be spoken. By candlelight that flickers like hellfire, he transcribes a catalogue of demons, their ranks, their powers, their ancient dominions over mortal souls. His hand trembles, not from fear but from divine purpose, as he serves God by mapping the territories of his greatest enemy. The scholar does not realize he is performing the most successful grave robbery in human history. Each name he copies from older texts carries within it the murdered corpse of a god. Astaroth, whose identity conceals the radiant Ishtar of Babylon. Goddess of love, war, and political power, who once received prayers from kings and prostitutes alike. Beelzebub, whose title, Lord of Flies, mocks the ancient Baal, whose name meant Lord throughout the Canaanite world. Mammon, whose demonic greed disguises Aramaic words for wealth that once blessed merchants and trade guilds. Divine names become diabolic surnames with the stroke of monastic pens. Watch how Christian demonology performs surgery on pantheons with surgical precision. The gods do not simply die, they are dissected, their divine attributes redistributed among hell's aristocracy according to new theological hierarchies. What once made them worshipful now makes them dangerous. What once brought blessing now carries curse. What once elevated human souls now drags them toward damnation. The operation succeeds because the surgeons believe they serve truth itself. In the great libraries of Constantinople and Cordoba, where Christian and Islamic scholars trade manuscripts like precious spices, demonic genealogies grow more complex with each copied text. Islamic demonology contributes its own fallen angels and rebellious jinn to the growing catalogue of hell's population. Iblis, whose name echoes ancient Mesopotamian deities, takes his place alongside European devils. The Marid and Ifrit of Arabian desert traditions find new homes in Christian grimoires. Hell becomes cosmopolitan, welcoming damned gods from every conquered civilization. The pseudo-monarchia daemonum spreads through medieval scriptoriums like plague through crowded cities. This false monarchy of demons catalogues 72 diabolic spirits, their ranks and specialties described with bureaucratic precision. Duke Amdusius commands 29 legions and appears as a unicorn, his horn twisted into diabolic parody of divine purity. Marquis Andromalius governs 36 legions and can find hidden treasure, abilities that echo ancient gods of earth and wealth. Hell adopts the organizational structure of earthly kingdoms, complete with titles, territories, and chains of command. But peer deeper into these demonic descriptions, an ancient divinity bleeds through, like blood seeping through bandages. President Botis appears as a viper, but can take human form, speaking of past and future. Powers that recall oracular serpent goddesses of pre-Christian mystery religions. Duke Dantalion shows the faces of all men and women, an ability that echoes shape-shifting deities who once served as divine messengers between human and divine realms. Every demonic power preserves some fragment of murdered godhood. The transformation proves most violent with deities, whose worship once threatened Christian sexual morality. Asmodeus, demon of lust and rage, carries within his diabolic nature the mangled remains of Zoroastrian Ayashma-deva. A destructive spirit, yes, but one whose destructiveness once served cosmic balance rather than simple evil. His association with King Solomon's temple connects him to ancient Near Eastern building traditions, where gods participated directly in sacred architecture. Divine creativity becomes demonic destruction through theological alchemy. Baphomet emerges from Templar trials like a fever dream, born of torture and political necessity. The Knights Templar, accused of worshipping a goat-headed idol, confess under interrogation to ceremonies that sound suspiciously like ancient mystery religion initiations. But the name itself, Baphomet, may corrupt Mahomet, revealing how Christian fear transformed even Islamic monotheism into polytheistic devil worship in crusader imagination. One man's prophet becomes another man's demon when politics demands scapegoats. Notice how Islamic civilization suffers its own theological grave robbing at Christian hands. Allah, the one God worshipped by millions of faithful Muslims, becomes Mahomet in Christian texts, transformed from supreme deity into false idol demanding diabolic allegiance. The sophisticated monotheism of Islamic theology collapses into primitive idol worship in Christian propaganda, its spiritual achievements dismissed as demonic deception. Even monotheistic rivals must be demonized when they threaten Christian supremacy. The grimoires multiply like cells dividing, each generation adding new demons while preserving old divine names in increasingly corrupted forms. The Lesser Key of Solomon catalogues spirits whose powers echo ancient divine specialties: healing, prophecy, treasure finding, love magic, knowledge of past and future. But these abilities, once freely given by gods who loved their worshippers, now require elaborate ritual contracts sealed with diabolic pacts. Divine gifts become demonic bargains struck at the cost of human souls. Scholarly Arabic texts contribute their own theological poison to the growing demonic encyclopedia. The Gayat al-Hakim, translated into Latin as Picatrix, describes spirits and planetary intelligences whose names preserve ancient Mesopotamian and Egyptian divine appellations. Babylonian star gods become demonic planetary rulers. Egyptian Neteru transform into fallen angels, ruling over earthly elements. Even the stars themselves fall under suspicion when they bear names of murdered gods. The process accelerates during the late medieval period as Christian Europe encounters new civilizations through trade and conquest. African and Asian deities, previously unknown to European scholars, undergo rapid demonization as missionaries report back about diabolic practices in distant lands. Hindu devas become Christian demons. Buddhist protective spirits transform into malevolent entities requiring exorcism. Hell expands its borders to accommodate every god that Christianity encounters. But the most sophisticated theological surgery occurs in treatises that attempt to explain how ancient peoples could have worshipped devils while believing they served gods. Christian scholars develop elaborate theories about demonic deception. The fallen angels deliberately masqueraded as benevolent deities to lead humanity astray. Every prayer offered to Jupiter strengthened Lucifer. Every sacrifice made to Isis fed diabolic power. Every oracle consulted at Delphi channeled demonic lies disguised as divine wisdom. The gods become victims of identity theft committed by hell's aristocracy. This theological framework allows Christianity to preserve ancient wisdom while condemning ancient worship. Classical philosophy survives because Plato and Aristotle sought truth through reason, rather than devotion to false gods. Roman engineering endures because it served practical purposes rather than religious ones. Greek mathematics persists because numbers themselves cannot be diabolic. Only direct divine worship requires complete eradication. The psychological implications cut deeper than any theological argument. By transforming gods into demons, Christianity creates a cosmic horror story where every previous religious experience becomes evidence of diabolic manipulation. The Celtic warrior who felt Lug's presence in battle was actually touched by hellish deception. The Roman matron who prayed to Juno for safe childbirth was unknowingly serving Satan's lieutenant. The Germanic farmer who honored Thor for protection was feeding power to hell's artillery. Entire civilizations discover their spiritual heritage, rewritten as collaboration with ultimate evil. Medieval artistic imagination runs wild with demonic imagery that preserves ancient divine iconography in perverted form. Cathedral sculptures show devils wearing crowns that once adorned gods' heads. Illuminated manuscripts depict demons wielding symbols, thunderbolts, sheaves of grain, healing serpents that once marked divine beneficence. Even hell's torments reflect divine powers turned inside out. Fire that once brought warmth becomes eternal burning. Water that once brought life becomes drowning flood. Divine attributes survive only as instruments of damnation. The linguistic archaeology reveals the crime with startling clarity. Beelzebub corrupts Baal-zebul, lord of the divine abode. Astaroth mangles Astarte Erd Ishtar, whose name once summoned love and fertility. Belial twists Belial, Hebrew for worthlessness, but originally applied to gods deemed worthless by Israelite prophets rather than actively evil entities. Every demonic name preserves evidence of divine murder, committed with etymological weapons. The process proves so thorough that modern occultists attempting to revive ancient traditions must work backward through layers of demonization to recover original divine nature. The gods sleep beneath diabolic masks, their true faces obscured by centuries of theological propaganda. To invoke them requires archaeological excavation through demonic overlay to reach divine bedrock beneath. Christian demonology becomes accidental preservation, saving divine names even while murdering divine nature. In monastery libraries where monks catalogue hell's population with bureaucratic precision, something unintended occurs. The very completeness of their demonic inventories ensures that ancient divine names survive, even in corrupted form. Future scholars will mine these grimoires like archaeological sites, extracting fragments of murdered pantheons from theological rubble. Hell's archivists become inadvertent curators of divine memory. The irony tastes bitter as hemlock. Christianity's most thorough victory, the transformation of gods into demons, also becomes its greatest failure. By preserving divine names within demonic hierarchies, the Church ensures that ancient wisdom survives even its most determined persecution. The gods may wear diabolic masks now, but their true nature waits beneath latex and spirit gum of theological theatre. What begins as Damnatio Memoriae becomes accidental preservation. In candlelit chambers where modern practitioners trace pentacles and recite ancient names, the gods stir beneath their demonic disguises. Astaroth remembers her sovereignty over love and war. Baal recalls his dominion over rain and fertility. The diabolic aristocracy discovers divine nobility, flowing in their veins like royal blood that no amount of theological torture can fully drain. The demons remember they were once gods, and gods, unlike mortals, possess very long memories. Brother Johannes sets down his quill as dawn light creeps through scriptorium windows. His catalogue of hell's nobility lies complete on parchment that will outlive kingdoms and empires. He believes he has served God by mapping Satan's territory, but he has actually performed an even greater service, preserving the names and natures of divine beings who would otherwise vanish entirely from human memory. The monk becomes unwitting guardian of murdered divinity. His hell maps actually treasure charts leading back to paradise lost. In the growing light, the ink dries on names that will survive to haunt Christian imagination for centuries. Gods disguised as demons, divine powers masquerading as diabolic threats, ancient wisdom preserved in the very texts meant to condemn it to oblivion. The dead gods laugh in languages that sound suspiciously like diabolic whispers. In the village of Hallerton, Leicestershire, something ancient stirs every Easter Monday. The bottle kicking begins at dawn. Not bottles at all, but wooden casks decorated with ribbons, and blessed by the local vicar who pretends not to notice their resemblance to fertility symbols older than Christ's crucifixion. Young men grapple in muddy fields, their bodies pressed against earth that once received different blood, different prayers, different names for the forces that make grain grow and livestock multiply. The crowd cheers for sport, but something deeper watches from the shadows between celebration and sacrament. The vicar leads prayers before the contest, his Latin syllables mixing with Anglo-Saxon war cries that carry echoes of Woden's name, half buried in ancestral memory. The men who struggle for possession of the decorated casks perform ritual as old as agriculture itself. The annual death and resurrection of vegetation spirits, the sacred marriage between sky and earth, the renewal of contracts between human communities and powers that govern harvest and hunger. Easter clothes old gods in new vestments, but the gods remember their original faces. Watch how the divine goes underground rather than simply disappearing. In Ireland, St. Bridget tends her eternal flame with rituals that mirror her pagan predecessors' worship, down to the smallest detail. Celtic Brigid's sacred well becomes St. Brigid's holy spring, its waters no less miraculous for the change in divine patronage. pilgrims still leave offerings of cloth and coin, still pray for healing and fertility, still perform circumambulations that follow patterns older than Patrick's mission. Christian sainthood becomes divine witness protection, hiding goddess identity behind martyr's crown. The fairy folk emerge from theological shadows like morning mist rising from sacred lakes. In Scottish Highlands and Irish glens, the Tuatha Dé Danann, the divine tribe of Celtic mythology, survive as diminished but still dangerous beings who inhabit hollow hills and underwater palaces. Farmers leave sources of milk for house spirits whose true names echo ancient gods. Brownie, Baron, Hob, Robin Goodfellow, Domovoy, Little Grandfather. The gods accept smaller shrines but maintain their essential nature. Place names preserve divine genealogies like fossil records embedded in landscape itself. Woden's Hill rises in Surrey, the god's name barely disguised by Saxon spelling. Thor's Stone marks crossroads in Northumberland, where lightning once struck at the thunder god's command. Bridget's wells bubble across Celtic countryside, their healing waters flowing from sources blessed before Rome fell. Geography itself becomes scripture written in languages older than Latin. Tuesday honors Tu, Germanic god of war and justice, whose single hand sealed cosmic contracts. Wednesday remembers Woden, the All-Father, whose ravens still fly through English folklore, disguised as harbingers and omens. Thursday thunders with Thor's hammer, though Christian congregations pretend their weekly worship schedule carries no pagan weight. Time itself preserves divine names that theology cannot fully erase. In the great feasts of the Christian calendar, older celebrations bleed through like ink through parchment. Christmas absorbs the Roman Saturnalia and Germanic Yule, its gift-giving and wassailing echoing rituals that once honored Sol Invictus and the returning light. Easter swallows the vernal equinox festivals, where Eostri's rabbits and eggs promised fertility after winter's death. The Church conquers pagan festivals by becoming them. May Day erupts across Europe, despite centuries of ecclesiastical disapproval. Young people dance around maypoles that rise like wooden phalluses from village greens, their ribbons weaving patterns that mirror ancient fertility magic. Girls wash their faces in May morning dew to capture the season's renewing power. Boys gather flowering branches to decorate doorways in rituals that honor vegetation spirits wearing increasingly thin Christian disguises. Spring refuses theological containment, bursting through dogmatic barriers like green shoots through winter stone. The carnival season transforms Christian Lent into an echo of Dionysiac mysteries. In Venice and Rio, in New Orleans and Nice, masked revelers channel spirits of chaos and renewal that predate Christianity by millennia. Sexual license, ritual drunkenness, and temporary social inversion create sacred spaces where ancient gods can breathe freely for a few precious days. Mardi Gras becomes temporary resurrection of divine energies that official religion declares dead. Halloween preserves Samhain's thin boundaries between living and dead, though trick-or-treaters disguised as ghosts and goblins rarely realize they participate in Celtic rituals for honoring ancestors and appeasing restless spirits. Jack-o'-lanterns flicker in windows like votive candles at roadside shrines, their carved faces echoing ancient ward symbols carved on standing stones. The dead walk openly one night each year, and Christianity pretends it's harmless fun. Folk tales preserve divine narratives in carefully sanitized forms. The devil appears as trickster figure who helps young lovers escape arranged marriages, who outsmarts greedy landlords, who teaches forbidden knowledge to those brave enough to seek him out. These stories carry echoes of gods like Loki and Hermes, divine boundary crossers who challenged authority and championed cunning over strength. Satan becomes accidental preserver of divine wisdom that official theology condemns. Traditional British wassailing ceremonies honor apple trees with offerings of cider and song, participants forming circles around ancient orchards while banging pots and pans to wake sleeping tree spirits. The ritual supposedly ensures good harvest, But its true function runs deeper, maintaining relationships with plant demons that Christianity nominally denies, but practically acknowledges. Agricultural communities cannot afford to abandon practices that actually work, regardless of theological correctness. Morris dancing preserves ritual combat between seasons, its handkerchief-waving warriors enacting battles between summer and winter kings that echo vegetation ceremonies stretching back to European prehistory. The dancers wear bells that jingle like temple sistrum, their faces blackened or hidden behind masks that transform them into something other than merely human. Folk performance becomes divine possession disguised as entertainment. German Christmas markets bloom with imagery that predates the Nativity by centuries. St. Nicholas merges with older gift-giving spirits, his reindeer-drawn sleigh echoing shamanic journeys between worlds. Christmas trees bring indoor groves into domestic space, their evergreen boughs promising life's persistence through winter's temporary death. Domestic decoration becomes involuntary shrine-making. Wells across Celtic Europe maintain their sacred character despite Christian blessing. Visitors still tie cloth strips to overhanging branches, still walk clockwise circles around the water source, still drop coins into depths that reflect sky like earthbound mirrors of heaven. The rituals remain identical to pre-Christian practice, only the prayers change, and even those often slip into older languages when desperation makes theology irrelevant. Sacred springs prove stronger than theological doctrine. Harvest festivals transform into church celebrations that barely disguise their agricultural origins. Corn dollies, final sheaves woven into female forms, represent grain goddesses whose sacrifice feeds communities through winter months. First fruits offered at altar rails mirror ancient libations poured for vegetation spirits whose continued blessing ensures survival. Christian gratitude becomes inadvertent goddess worship. Traditional medicine preserves goddess wisdom in herbalist practices, passed down through generations of wise women. Plantain becomes white man's footprint in Native American lore, but European folk names reveal deeper layers. Waybread for travelers, woundwort for healing, appellations that echo Bridget's dominion over health and journeying. Healing herbs remember their divine origins, even when healers forget goddess names. Medieval church architecture accommodates older sacred symbols with reluctant acceptance. Green man faces peer from stone capitals and boss carvings, their leafy visages representing vegetation spirits that Christian stonemasons dare not completely exclude. Gargoyles channel protective energies that echo temple guardians from pre-Christian traditions. Stone itself resists theological purification. Country wedding customs preserve fertility rituals with transparent disguises. Throwing rice or confetti mimics ancient grain-scattering ceremonies meant to ensure abundance. Wedding rings echo infinity symbols that represent eternal return of seasonal cycles. Bridal veils recall the sacred covering that separated priestesses from mundane world during divine possession. Marriage ceremonies become involuntary goddess invocations. The wild hunt thunders across European folklore, its spectral riders led by figures whose names shift but whose essential nature remains constant. Odin becomes the huntsman. Diana transforms into Dame Mabundia. But the midnight cavalcade continues racing across storm-torn skies, gathering souls of the restless dead while bringing prophetic visions to those brave enough to watch. Divine processions persist despite theological disapproval. Fairy rings mark places where divine dancers once celebrated seasonal transitions, their mushroom circles preserving sacred geography that Christianity cannot completely consecrate. Children still know not to step inside these natural temples, their inherited caution recognizing spiritual authority that transcends catechism lessons. Ancient warnings prove stronger than modern skepticism. Crossroads retain their liminal power despite Christian attempts to neutralize them with strategically placed churches and shrines. Suicide victims buried at three-way intersections acknowledge older beliefs about souls trapped between worlds. gallows erected where paths converge, tap into execution magic that predates Roman crucifixions. Sacred geography proves more persistent than religious architecture built upon it. Traditional seasonal foods preserve communion with agricultural deities through ritual consumption. Pancakes on Shrove Tuesday echo ancient offerings to grain goddesses. Hot cross buns mark equinox celebrations older than Easter. Soul cakes distributed on All Souls' Night feed ancestral spirits, whose hunger Christian theology officially denies. Eating becomes inadvertent sacrament honoring powers that official religion declares non-existent. Folk remedies invoke protective spirits through seemingly secular practices. Hanging iron horseshoes above doorways maintains ancient ward magic against malevolent influences. Planting rowan trees near house foundations preserves Celtic traditions of supernatural protection. Burning sage smudges cleanses spaces using indigenous wisdom that Christianity alternately condemns and quietly adopts. Practical magic persists because it demonstrably works, regardless of theological explanations. Country churches accommodate popular practices that bishops would rather prohibit but dare not alienate congregations by forbidding. Blessing of animals on St. Francis Day echoes older rituals honoring pastoral deities. Harvest festivals transform altars into agricultural displays that mirror ancient first fruits offerings. Palm Sunday processions follow routes that coincide suspiciously with pre-Christian pilgrimage paths. Ecclesiastical pragmatism preserves pagan practices under Christian labels. The gods adapt to their changed circumstances with divine flexibility. They accept smaller shrines, quieter worship, more careful names. They wear saint costumes and fairy glamour, devil masks and folktale disguises. But their essential nature persists like underground rivers that surface wherever theological pressure grows thin. Divine waters find their way through cracks in dogmatic stone, in quiet moments between official prayers, in private rituals performed behind closed doors, in seasonal celebrations that church authorities pretend not to notice. The old gods breathe freely. Their worshippers may not recognize divine presences in familiar practices, but recognition proves unnecessary for relationship to continue. The gods care more about devotion than theology, more about practice than belief. Spring still returns with divine laughter echoing through blossoming orchards. Summer still blazes with solar passion that no amount of Christian interpretation can contain. Autumn still whispers of divine sacrifice in every falling leaf. Winter still promises divine rest before inevitable resurrection. The seasons themselves become scripture, written in languages older than human speech, carrying divine messages that no theological censorship can fully suppress. The old gods do not die. They simply learn new ways of being divine in a world that officially denies their existence, while practically depending on their continued blessing for survival itself. In the distance, May Day dancers circle their phallic pole, while church bells call the faithful to morning prayer. And somehow, both rituals honor the same inexhaustible mystery, wearing different masks for different eyes. In the burned remains of the sacred grove, where ancient oaks once whispered divine secrets to druids who knew their language, nothing grows but ash and silence. The gods have been quiet now for more than a millennium, their voices stilled by theological axes that cut deeper than any earthly blade. But in the charred soil, something stirs, not resurrection, for the dead gods do not return as they once were, but memory, rising like smoke from altar fires that burned when the world was younger and more alive with sacred presence. What remains is not the gods themselves, but the shape of their absence. The God-shaped holes in human consciousness that no amount of monotheistic architecture can fill. Walk through modern cities where glass towers scrape heaven with secular prayers for profit and progress. The sacred has been zoned out of existence, relegated to church buildings that open only on appointed days, confined to holy hours that tick by on digital clocks, indifferent to lunar cycles and seasonal rhythms. The divine, once intimate as breath and present as blood, has been transformed into weekend appointment, Sunday obligation, something separate from the real business of living. We have built a world where the sacred needs permission to exist. The gods who died were not merely objects of worship. They were relationships, connections between human consciousness and the living forces that animate earth and sky, plant and animal, birth and death. When Pan fell silent, something in humanity's capacity for wildness died with him. When Brigid became sanitized saint instead of fierce goddess, women lost access to divine power that once flowed through their own bodies like rivers through familiar landscape. Divine murder creates orphans of entire civilizations. Consider what vanished when every stream became just water, every mountain merely stone, every forest nothing more than timber waiting to be harvested. The animistic understanding that recognized consciousness in all things, that saw divinity shining through every crack in reality, withered like plants, deprived of sunlight. The world became object rather than subject, resource rather than relative, dead matter instead of living presence. Ecological crisis begins with theological devastation. In laboratories where scientists peer through microscopes at cellular mysteries, they discover networks of fungal communication connecting forest trees in vast underground webs. These mycorrhizal relationships, where plants share nutrients and information through soil-based networks, mirror ancient understanding of Earth as living entity with its own intelligence and intention. But modern minds can acknowledge biological fact while remaining blind to spiritual implication. We have learned to see the machinery of sacred without recognizing the sacred itself. Indigenous communities worldwide carry fragments of what European civilization lost when it murdered its gods. Aboriginal Australians still sing songlines that map sacred geography across continent-spanning landscapes. Native American tribes maintain relationships with plant spirits that inform both practical medicine and spiritual healing. African traditions preserve understanding of ancestral presence that connects living communities with divine wisdom of those who walked this earth before. The God-shaped holes in Western consciousness reveal themselves through envious study of spiritual traditions that Christianity failed to completely destroy. Depth psychology attempts to map the territories that theology abandoned. Carl Jung's collective unconscious preserves archetypal patterns that echo divine relationships: the great mother, the wise old man, the trickster, the hero's journey, but frames them as psychological phenomena rather than spiritual realities. The gods become metaphors for mental processes rather than autonomous beings worthy of relationship and reverence. Even psychological insight cannot fully restore what theological vandalism destroyed. Modern paganism grows like grass through cracks in concrete sidewalks, seeking to reconstruct relationships with divine forces that mainstream religion insists no longer exist. Wiccan circles cast sacred space where practitioners invoke elemental powers and seasonal deities. Norse heathens rebuild relationships with Aesir and Vanir through study of surviving lore and experimental ritual. Celtic reconstructionists piece together fragments of druidic wisdom from archaeology and folklore. But reconstruction cannot fully restore what organic relationship once provided. The environmental movement unconsciously mourns the loss of sacred landscape. Activists who fight to preserve old-growth forests, to protect endangered species, to halt climate change, often describe their motivation in spiritual language that echoes ancient understanding of Earth as divine mother worthy of protection and reverence. But secular environmentalism lacks theological foundation for its essentially religious impulse. Ecological activism becomes involuntary goddess worship practiced by people who deny goddess existence. Agricultural communities that remember pre-industrial rhythms maintain vestigial connections to divine forces that once blessed planting and harvest. Farmers who plant by lunar phases, who read weather patterns in cloud formations and animal behavior, who treats soil as living entity requiring care rather than merely input for production. These practitioners maintain relationships that approximate ancient agricultural spirituality. The land remembers what humanity has chosen to forget. Traditional medicine worldwide preserves goddess wisdom in herbalist practices that acknowledge plant spirits and healing energies. Acupuncturists work with meridian systems that map subtle energy flows through human bodies. Homeopaths dilute substances until only energetic signatures remain, treating patients with medicines that exist in realm between matter and spirit. Healing arts maintain doorways to sacred understanding that orthodox religions sealed shut. Artistic inspiration still carries traces of divine possession that ancient cultures recognized as muse-given gift. Musicians who describe songs coming through them rather than being composed by conscious effort experience creative process that ancient poets understood as divine collaboration. Painters who enter flow states where brush moves without conscious direction participate in inspiration traditions that once connected artists with divine patrons. Creative ecstasy preserves fragments of divine relationship within secular framework. The sexual revolution of the 20th century represents unconscious attempt to reclaim sacred understanding of physical pleasure that Christianity spent centuries condemning. Free love movements, tantra workshops, and neo-pagan fertility celebrations seek to restore erotic experience to spiritual significance rather than treating it as mere biological function or moral failing. Bodies remember what theology commanded them to forget. Psychedelic research reveals neurochemical basis for mystical experience that shamanic traditions have utilized for millennia. Scientists mapping DMT and psilocybin effects on brain function discover biological machinery for divine encounter that industrial civilization has systematically suppressed. Ancient plant medicines offer doorways to spiritual dimensions that monotheistic religion either denies or claims exclusive access to through sanctioned sacraments. Chemistry preserves what theology destroyed, offering pharmaceutical resurrection of divine relationship. Death practices in modern societies reveal desperate hunger for spiritual meaning that secular funeral homes and medical establishments cannot satisfy. Hospice workers describe dying patients experiencing visitations from deceased relatives, sensing presence of beings that materialism insists cannot exist. Green burial movements seek to return human remains to earth in ways that honor connection between body and soil. Even death cannot completely sever relationships that theology declared imaginary. Children possess natural animism that adult education systematically destroys. Young minds readily accept that trees have feelings, that rocks carry memories, that animals speak languages adults cannot hear. Childhood imagination preserves access to sacred understanding that rationalist education replaces with mechanical comprehension of lifeless universe. We systematically murder divine perception in our own offspring to prepare them for a world that denies the sacred. The loneliness epidemic plaguing modern societies reflects spiritual isolation that monotheistic emphasis on singular divine relationship cannot heal. Humans evolved in communities surrounded by multiple divine presences, household gods, ancestral spirits, plant demons, animal guides that provided sense of belonging within cosmic community. Relationship with single deity cannot replace social network of divine beings that once populated human spiritual landscape. Theological monotheism creates spiritual loneliness that no amount of prayer can fully address. Virtual reality technology attempts to reconstruct immersive spiritual experience that sacred landscapes once provided naturally. Digital temples and computer-generated divine encounters offer simulated transcendence for consciousness that has forgotten how to access authentic divine relationship. Gaming environments create mythological narratives where players encounter gods and goddesses that official religion insists exist only as fantasy. We build artificial heavens because we destroyed access to natural sacred. The gods who became demons wait in shadow realms between orthodox theology and forbidden knowledge. Occult traditions maintain relationships with these displaced divinities, invoking divine names that Christianity transformed into diabolic appellations. Practitioners of ceremonial magic work with angelic hierarchies that preserve ancient pantheons under medieval disguises. Hell becomes accidental heaven for gods who refuse to die completely. Archaeological discoveries continuously resurrect evidence of spiritual sophistication that ecclesiastical history attempted to bury. Göbekli Tepe reveals temple complexes older than agriculture, suggesting that sacred architecture preceded practical settlement. Cave paintings show shamanic journey imagery that connects Paleolithic consciousness with divine realms. Megalithic monuments align with astronomical phenomena in ways that demonstrate ancient understanding of cosmic sacred. The earth itself testifies to spiritual relationships that theology declared primitive superstition. Climate change confronts industrial civilization with consequences of treating Earth as dead resource rather than living divine presence. Rising seas and extreme weather patterns reflect ecological imbalance that ancient cultures would have understood as divine anger, requiring ritual reconciliation. But secular environmentalism lacks theological framework for addressing spiritual dimensions of ecological crisis. Environmental catastrophe becomes involuntary divine judgment on civilizations that murdered Earth goddesses. The crisis extends beyond environmental destruction to encompass psychological and spiritual devastation. Depression and anxiety rates climb as human consciousness, evolved for relationship with diverse spiritual community, struggles to find meaning within purely materialistic framework. Suicide epidemics among indigenous populations forced into industrial society reveal deadly consequences of severing connections with ancestral spiritual traditions. Killing gods proves lethal to their worshippers across generations, but something stirs in the shadows between orthodoxy and heresy, between official doctrine and underground wisdom. New religious movements blend ancient practices with contemporary understanding. Eco-spirituality movements recognize Earth as divine presence worthy of reverence. Feminist theology reclaims goddess imagery for divine feminine that patriarchal monotheism excluded. The sacred returns through cracks in theological concrete, patient as underground rivers seeking surface springs. Modern physics describes a universe that ancient animists would recognize. Quantum entanglement that connects all things. Observer effects that suggest consciousness shapes reality. Wave-particle duality that mirrors spirit-matter relationships that shamanic traditions have always understood. Scientific materialism inadvertently rediscovers magical understanding of cosmos, where everything connects to everything else through invisible webs of influence. Science becomes accidental theology for minds prepared to recognize divine implications of natural law. The gods may not return in forms their original worshippers would recognize, but divine principles persist like seeds, waiting for favorable conditions. Love remains sacred, despite Christian attempts to monopolize its spiritual significance. Beauty continues to inspire reverence regardless of theological explanations. Truth demands dedication that transcends religious boundaries. Justice calls for sacrifice that honors divine, rather than merely human authority. The sacred survives theological murder by wearing secular clothes. In quiet moments between official prayers, when dawnlight falls on dew-covered grass and something ancient stirs in human hearts, memory surfaces like underground rivers reaching sunlight. Not nostalgia for lost golden age, but recognition of spiritual potentials that remain available despite centuries of suppression. The capacity for divine relationship remains embedded in human consciousness, like genetic memory waiting for activation. The gods live on in human hearts that remember their true names. What we lost when the gods became demons was not mere mythology or primitive superstition, but sophisticated understanding of human relationship with living cosmos. We lost languages for speaking with plant spirits, rituals for honoring seasonal transitions, practices for maintaining harmony between human communities, and divine forces that govern life and death, growth and decay, love and loss. We lost the art of being human in a world alive with sacred presence. But loss creates longing, and longing opens doorways that orthodoxy cannot permanently seal. The murdered gods whisper through folklore and fairy tale, through artistic inspiration and erotic encounter, through ecological crisis and technological revelation. They speak in languages that rational minds dismiss as metaphor, while hearts recognize as literal truth. Divine presence proves stronger than theological absence. The choice remains before each human consciousness: to inhabit dead universe described by materialistic science and monotheistic theology, or to risk relationship with living cosmos where divine presence bleeds through every crack in ordinary reality. The gods do not demand faith so much as attention, not worship so much as relationship, not theology so much as recognition. They wait in crossroads and sacred wells, in blossoming trees and starlit skies, in every place where beauty breaks through utility and wonder pierces the veil of the familiar. The world remains as magical as ever. We have simply forgotten how to see with eyes that recognize the sacred shining through everything that lives, breathes, grows, loves, dies, and is reborn. In the distance, pipes play melodies that sound like longing for what was lost and hope for what might yet be found. The music carries on wind that once brought only whispers of leaves, cries of hawks, laughter of spirits dancing in groves where gods walked openly among their beloved human children. The song continues, patient as seasons, persistent as seeds, eternal as the divine love that no amount of theological hatred can fully extinguish. Listen.